Starting from the 1860s, tens of thousands of Pacific Islanders were kidnapped, forced and coerced onto boat by trickery, and taken to Australia to work in Queensland. This practice of recruiting Melanesians became known as blackbirding. The owners, captains, and crews of the ships involved in the acquisition of these laborers were termed blackbirders. The practice took place on a large scale with the taking of people indigenous to the numerous islands in the Pacific Ocean during the 19th and 20th centuries. These blackbirded people were called Kanakas, or South Sea Islanders. Kanaka was a word the Hawaiians working on whaling ships used to describe themselves and meant human being. It came to be used for all Pacific Islanders. Kanakas were taken from places such as Papua New Guinea, the Solomon Islands, Vanuatu, Niue, Easter Island, the Gilbert Islands, Tuvalu, Fiji, and the islands of the Bismarck Archipelago, amongst others. The first instance of blackbirding recorded in Australia was in 1847, when Captain William Boyd landed 65 men from the New Hebrides with his schooner Velocity. However, the trade started in earnest in 1863, when Sydney politician and merchant captain Robert Towns arranged for sandalwood trader Henry Lewin to recruit islanders from Vanuatu for his cotton plantation on the Logan River near Brisbane. The American Civil War had disrupted cotton production there and provided an opportunity for others to enter the market while prices were higher. Cotton was a labor-intensive crop, and the Kanakas became a cheap source of this labor. The demand for this kind of cheap labor principally came from European colonists in New South Wales, Queensland, Samoa, New Caledonia, Fiji, Tahiti, Hawaii, and New Zealand, as well as plantations in Peru, Mexico, and Guatemala. Laboring on sugarcane, cotton, and coffee plantations in these lands was the main usage of blackbirded labor. Managers from the West Indies, as well as U.S., Cuba, and Brazil, was recruited where slavery was either just ending or not yet abolished. They were experts in what laborers should look like, dark-skinned, cheap, and easy to control by restricting options for escape. Examples of blackbirding outside the South Pacific include the early days of the pearling industry in Western Australia at Nickel Bay and Broome, where Aboriginal Australians were blackbirded from the surrounding areas. Chinese men, too, were blackbirded from Amoy, present-day Xiamen, in China, in the 1840s and 1850s, to work as unskilled laborers in the pearling, gold, and farming industries. Blackbirding in the Pacific from the 1840s continued into the 1930s, although by this time the slaves were known as indentured servants. As they were paid wages way below what Europeans' workers earned, blackbirded men were not classified as slaves. As the men had signed contracts, they were technically indentured laborers. Nevertheless, the laborers endured slave-like conditions. The laborers also suffered a high death rate. Around 30% of arrivals died at the plantations due to exposure to European diseases, malnutrition, and mistreatment. Most were buried in mass unmarked graves, some of which are still being uncovered today. The indentured labor of Pacific Islander workers came to an end in what was known as the Pacific Island Laborers Act of 1901 that ordered the mass deportation of most of the 10,000 or so of all Kanakas in the country after 1906. Under the act, the only islanders allowed to stay in Australia were those who arrived before September 1, 1879, worked in ship's crews, or received an exemption. Only about 2,500 islanders avoided deportation, and their descendants are now known as Australia's South Sea Islander community. In 1994, the Australian government recognized South Sea Islanders as a distinct cultural group and thanked them for their services to Australia's economy, which included the sugar industry, farming and grazing, the maritime industry of pearling, mining, the railways, domestic service, and child care. Other colonial powers involved in the blackbirding trade were the French, who had developed a reputation of brutality against their slaves. The French blackbirding trade took place between the Melanesian islands of New Hebrides and New Caledonia. In New Caledonia case, blackbirding in the early stages involved the kidnapping of children from the Loyalty Islands to the Grande Terre for forced labor in plantation agriculture, mines, pastoral, domestic, and sailing industries. Children as young as 6 years old were legally recruited on lengthy contracts up to 12 years. Workers not working to their employees' satisfaction were imprisoned as unpaid prison labor. The descendants of the slave traders in New Caledonia today are known as the Caldoches community in the French territory, who are still bitterly opposed to the independence of the Kanaki people. As the atrocities associated with blackbirding became widely known to the South Sea Island communities, resistance grew, and more so, with the access to modern firearms leading to violent clashes between blackbirders and islanders. Unfortunately, colonial navy ships were called upon to bombard the villages and execute the islanders in retaliation. Sadly, practices similar to blackbirding, however, continue to the present day. One example is the kidnapping and coercion, often at gunpoint, of indigenous peoples in Central America to work as plantation laborers in the region. They are subjected to poor living conditions, are exposed to heavy pesticide loads, and do hard labor for very little pay. Today, the descendants of those who were blackbirded continue to bring awareness to the injustice and unimaginable cruelty done to their ancestors and the innocent lives that were shattered. As we reflect over our cup of tea and coffee, let this dark chapter in history serve as a reminder of the lengths to which human greed and cruelty can go. Write yes, I know about blackbirding, or no, I didn't know about blackbirding down below. Are you an Australian-vor New Zealander? What do you think about this dark chapter in your country's history? As for the civil unrest in New Caledonia at this time, should the Kanaki people be given their rights as human beings by the French government? Should blackbirding be seen as part of the global slave trade? Share your thoughts below and like, share, and subscribe, and for more on A Cup of History.